I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with the prolific two-time Emmy-winning director, Paris Barclay. Paris, first of all, before we go into a bit of a deep dive, tell us
Mm.
why you were initially hesitant to work on the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
You heard I was hesitant, did
A
you?
little, yeah.
Well, I got a call from Ryan about doing a series about Jeffrey Dahmer. And I know Jeffrey Dahmer. I lived through the Jeffrey Dahmer experience, and I didn't want to be a part of a story that, made him any more famous, infamous than he currently is. I thought enough about Jeffrey Dahmer. Uh, but then he started telling me about this particular episode that he wanted me to do. He really cast me for a particular episode. And eventually I also did the finale of the series for this episode, Silence. And, Ryan can be very seductive. And he won me over saying, this is where the series shifts. And the focus clearly leaves Dahmer and goes to, in this particular case, this young gay Black man who we spend time with, living in his world. Eventually he meets Dahmer. And although they develop a relationship that seems like it might be positive, it ends up being tragic. But he really wanted to focus on this victim and his story. And as he told me more specifics about the story, I was moved. And I thought, this is something that's worth the struggle of doing it. And it was.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't seen it yet, firstly, where have you been? But Silenced.
Uh-oh. Robert, I lost you. I'm sorry.
Tony Hughes, a deaf nodding Robbie Burford. And so I'm curious though, like, how did it affect you personally? Because it affected every one of us watching it. It was such a beautiful story, very emotional. But what about you? I mean, you have to take it home every night when you're working on it.
It's a really good question. Most of my tears happened when I first read it. I realized, that this was a beautiful but sad story. But then as I started to develop it and work on it, I realized it was going to be bigger than that we were going to have an opportunity to really take deaf actors that the world hadn't seen before, introduce them to the world, bring them into this gay Black deaf culture, and really do something that's beyond just another story of a serial killer, that really made these people human and real, and made people who are hearing understand that there is a language and there is a culture and there is a way of communicating that's just as vibrant as what we do with, our voices. And that was super exciting. So as I dug more into that, and I realized my challenge would be to take Jeffrey Dahmer and move him into the background, which I was gleeful about, and really elevate the story of this young man and, make him the protagonist of it. And as I worked that in every scene, in every shot, I developed a love for Tony Hughes that I think is part of the reason why it ended up being so painful, is because we ended up being so attached to him. I mean, we were fortunate to have Rodney Burford playing him, who had not experienced, actually working in a dramatic role before. He had been in a reality show. He was found by our crack casting team of Dawson and Kritzer and Ulrich, and brought them to us. And I thought, this guy can do it. And he did it. And day by day, we sort of coached him through it. And our hearts kind of were lifted by his spirit. And so in this particular episode, we took a turn. The whole series took a turn to really be about what we wanted the whole series to be about in totality, which is these victims were people. They were worth telling the stories of. They were worth elevating. And that would be our goal.
And the thing is, on any other show, perhaps this could have gone really badly. It could have been manipulative. It could have been like exploitative. But it wasn't. It was so sensitive. And I tell you what, Paris, what got me was it opens up with him as a baby. And it just reminds us that these victims are sons and brothers and friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kills me every time. Like, I think about it often. And I just wonder if after all this time, is it still something that maybe you think about every once in a while?
Yeah, very much. I've tried to avoid watching it from beginning to end again, because now that I watch it, I have a distance from it, and I'm not watching it more like a spectator, and it's emotionally draining. And I understand that, people may find it difficult, but no one is murdered, at least on screen in this particular episode. No one is sawed into pieces. There is some brutality at the very end that is in some ways difficult to watch, but most of it is a love story, and it's the story of a love that's distorted and twisted through Jeffrey Dahmer's psyche, and it's a love that a generous, open-hearted young man who had the same kind of crazy dreams I had. I mean, I came to New York just like Tony Hughes, thinking I was going to, become a musical theater writer and change the world. And, everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people have that feeling of hope when you come to a place. And, his life was ended too soon. And it is really hard to face the reality of death. And just like we did with Bobby Simone, when I did NYPD Blue and Bobby Simone's death, to really put it on the screen and to really make it vivid is very difficult to watch. And fortunately for us, because, David McMillan and Janet Mock and Ian Brennan and Ryan and everyone who contributed to the script made it such a, I think really a masterwork of script writing, just for my taste. And I've seen a lot of scripts. I knew that this would be something that would be special. And so it's still with me. It's probably the proudest I've been of a show since doing that NYPD Blue episode.
Wow. And also there's some important touchstones in the episode about him being deaf and Black and gay, but it really shies away from the standard tropes about his race and sexuality and disability. He's a person. And so how much of that in the script did that inform your choices as director?
Oh, that's a really great question. It informed everything. I mean, when we sit at the table in the pizza parlor with Tony Hughes and Rico and played by Jerry DeBusk and Michael Anthony Spady, just at the table height, and we actually have the experience of being with them and watching their conversation without any sound, just watching how they communicate, and with us learning the words from the subtitles, suddenly we're among them and we're part of them and we're experiencing them in a way up close and personal that I hadn't done before. And I really wanted to see that representation. So I was so passionate about it. That scene in particular, we rehearsed days before. We really refined the language with our ASL, masters and our interpreters, and got it to a place where the actors were very comfortable and the language was very comfortable and there was a fluidity about it, because we believe that the authenticity of that was super, super important to all of us who are working on it. So for me, getting it right was the thing. We got to get this right, and we got to make the viewer experience it the way that we would dream of experiencing it, to see people as who may be different superficially, but who share so much. They share the same loves, the same hopes, the same aspirations. And that's what I think really makes it shine for me.
Totally. Also, on the flip side, when you witness a completely transformative, committed performance from lead actor Evan Peters, how do you, as an experienced director, collaborate and provide guidance or guardrails to someone like that without compromising his intensity and raw emotion?
You are coming with great question after great question, Robert, I have to say. Well, it's a challenge, because just like when I work with Gabriel Byrne and in treatment, when you're working with an actor is at the top of their game, your game has to be elevated as well. And so I met with Evan via Zoom, because we were heavily into COVID at that time. And we spent an hour and a half just talking about how he was approaching the role, what I had learned from the writers and Ryan about what they wanted in this episode. And I found different ways to communicate with him in that process. And what I discovered, a lot has been made of his total commitment. And you feel like you're going to have this method-like guy who's wandering around. And there was some of that. But there's also the real Evan got to percolate through this episode. Yeah. He found a lightness on occasion. He found, a little bit of who he really is was able to be applied to this character. But at the same time, I wanted to keep a lid on that, because I didn't want Jeffrey Dahmer to be the guy you like. No. I didn't want your love to go towards Jeffrey Dahmer. So I tried to keep them equal as much as possible. You'll see a lot of them in two shots where Tony is just as tall as Evan. And the two of them are really, when they first meet, they sit at the bar and it's the two of them on either side of the frame. It's not a shot that favors Evan. It's not a shot that makes him heroic. So I used the shooting and actually just really working with Evan conscientiously to make sure it wasn't, I don't want him ever to be likable. I didn't want Jeffrey Dahmer to be sympathetic. I wanted all of our love to go basically to the protagonist. Dahmer is someone we will never understand, and I think is not worthy of our love, frankly. He's a destroyer, a sociopath, everything that you can say. But in this particular story, his villainy has to be matched by the heroicness of Tony and the heroicness of a dreamer who is just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So Evan and I talked a lot. We talked a lot on the set. And as things went on, he realized that I was doing things to eliminate some of his greatest charming skills. Like when he actually cooks his dinner at the end of the episode, you'll notice he's cut off. We see his hands. We don't see his face. We don't see what he's going through. We just see what he's doing. And we did a lot of that. We didn't want to be inside of his head. We wanted to be outside watching. But for Tony, we wanted to be there where we could feel the love. So I used it forced me to go back to every single thing I learned in the earliest days of starting to direct, to figure out, in a way, how to minimize his star power, but at the same time, let him continue to draw the line of the character that he imagined through the whole series. So that was part of the fun of it.
If I may say, a lesser Helmer would have maybe gone with elevating the Dahmer character, because that's what you tend to do. You want to find the best parts of the actor and really elevate and amplify, and you had to really go against that whole just that whole philosophy, I suppose. And that's really interesting to me. That's what I loved so much about how you framed this. Let's talk about Ryan Murphy, because I watch every single thing that he does, which either means that I need to get a life or that he is an incredible creator. What do you most value about him creatively?
Well, I've done 4 or 5 shows with Ryan Murphy, and I've known him for a long time, and I don't think there's anyone quite like him in our industry. He believes that this art, this medium, is to be stretched. It is not to be, continually replicated. It is not to be constantly recombinant. It's to be really finding what's new. And that brought you Glee, and that brought you American Horror Story, and that brought you Nip Tuck. And with Dahmer, he said, what's new is we haven't really looked at the victims, and we haven't really looked at the damage caused to society because of Dahmer. We haven't looked at the police. We haven't looked at the struggle of a Glenda Cleveland, this woman who knew and who heard and was not listened to. So he finds a way to focus on that thing that's new and that thing that needs to be said now. And I just think it's I don't know if he thinks about it. I just think it's intuitive in him that he wants to say, what is the new about this? What is the boundary that hasn't been examined that we can go at? And how can we find a different way to do it? That's why his things always end up being so exciting. So you're not a fool for living in the Ryan Murphy world.
Yeah, there's something about him. Everything he does, everything he touches tends to gold, and that's it sounds like a cliche, but it's kind of true. So one of your undeniable strengths as a director and artist is your genre versatility. So you've got extensive experience, particularly in prestige television. That being said, do you have a particular genre or style of show that you find the most interesting or challenging or exciting? What do you gravitate towards? It doesn't matter.
Well, I began in the theater. I really started working as a composer, and I want to go back to that and bring that skill back later in my next phase of my career. But the closest and the happiest I was structurally in a show was In Treatment, because In Treatment was really about the play. It was written by many, many playwrights and many, many writers who took the art of the word and the performance as the only thing that we really needed to focus on. Not so much the lighting, not so much the camera movement, but actually just the play and the intensity that's going on between these two people. So with that show, we got to come in the morning and rehearse for 4 hours, and we would do the play. Wow. And we would work it out, and we talk about the dialogue with Sarah Treem and with Rodrigo Garcia, and we would shape it. And then the actors would go away for a bit. We figured out how we'd shoot it. We'd have lunch. We'd come back and start shooting it for half a day. And then the next day we would shoot the rest. So every episode was done in 2 days. And that intense sort of workshopping and then performance of it made it exhilarating. We did the whole show for the crew before we went away for lunch. We would perform what was today's or the play of the 48-hour period that we were doing. and the crew would applaud, and then we'd get into figuring out how we're going to shoot it. And to me, that was the most fun I've had with my clothes on in the in the world of being a director.
Wow, I actually did not know. I thought I knew everything, but I did not know that. And you've
Yeah.
got people like Ariel Byrne and Diane Wiest and Melissa George and Blair Underwood and Glenn Turman. My God, that would have been amazing, amazing to witness. But anyway,
It was great. But then Gabriel Byrne, that's the only series, maybe until this one that I'm doing now, where the actor is actually in every scene of the show.
yeah,
There are very, very few scenes, a few in the waiting room where the leading actor wasn't saying dialogue. And so having one person say every other line in a series is unprecedented at that time. It's just a lot of work. Every day Gabriel would come in, and every day he'd have 20 pages. He's not a soap opera actor who's been trained on a soap opera. He wants to actually do it all as deeply and as Gabriel Byrne as he can. So it's also incredibly exhausting for him and exhilarating, because the other actors would come every 2 weeks. Yeah, they would show up for their week every 2 weeks. They'd be fresh, and they'd have a separate rehearsal, and they would have rehearse with the stand-in Gabriel, and they'd come and they'd know their lines, and Gabriel would just watch them in the rehearsals and in the first takes, just seeing what they're doing, and then slowly he would evolve his reactions and build his performance based on what they were doing, and suddenly the episode was over and was this beautiful cohesive whole. So I just did that show. I just thought it was great.
yeah, it was incredible. I'll always remember you won 2 Emmys for NYPD Blue for Lost Israel Part 2, and of course, Hearts and Souls. It was a while ago now. We have to admit
Yeah,
that.
a couple minutes ago.
We're getting a little older, just a little. And then, so I remember you for that. But then, of course, your tenure as DGA president, that's a huge accomplishment for you, Paris, in your career. But I want to know, what were the most significant changes that you observed in the industry during your tenure as DGA president?
Well, the two big things were we really started to turn the tide of the diversity inclusion effort. That was the point where we really started to get through. By using our surveys and by meeting with the studios and the companies and by some contractual bargaining, we really started to see the numbers climb of women and minorities working in the industry. So now there's starting to be something that's closer to a parity with everyone else. And I thought that was amazing. The second thing is, I was president during the time that safety became a primary consideration. I was president during the time of the Sarah Jones accident. And from that moment on, literally, that was a top of mind thing for all of us. And so now every show I do, I make that as the first thing I say in the production meeting. I just stop everything and say, there's nothing that's going to happen here that everyone isn't comfortable with. We are going to give you all the right to say cut. You all have the right to say, I'm not comfortable with what's going on. I would like this to be checked. Everyone should be reacting like any stunt or any action sequence, like a member of their family is doing it. And that has also been part of the DGA's process to increase the safeguards on safety, starting from that time on. And we're getting there. It's getting to be better and better as time goes on.
That's so fascinating. Well, look, after all these years, I think we will always now connect you with this episode of Dahmer as well, because it was really something. And Paris, thank you for your time today. Congratulations on some beautiful work.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you doing this.